And welcome again, my friends, to another Living Hope Today study. How thankful I am to God that you're here with me. And today, we find ourselves in 2 Samuel chapter 16, and one thing's for sure. No matter how high people get in life, God knows how to humiliate them and bring them down. You know, there's one thing that God hates, it's pride, right? He hates pride. Well, David's exercised his pride. He's taken somebody else's wife. He's gotten her pregnant, killed her husband, tried to deceive everybody in it, and he's been confronted. He knows God's forgiven him, but yet the shame of his actions is bringing him to do things that seem to be weak in some way. And he seems to almost think that he might be receiving God's judgment when bad things happen to him, as if that's what he would deserve and that would be the right thing to happen. Let me show you. It's very insightful for us today. Verse 1, chapter 16, when David had gone a short distance. Now you remember, I hope, before I go too far here, that David has basically gone into self-imposed exile because Absalom has won the hearts of Israel, his son, and Absalom is about to take over. David's stuck in this terrible position. If he attacks Absalom, he's putting himself in the position of killing his own son. So what does he do? He flees as if, in fact, he even says in chapter 15, if God wants me to keep the throne, he'll make sure I somehow do that. But he's not willing to take action against Absalom. So in chapter 16, he's starting to make his escape. Okay. So here we are. When David had gone a short distance beyond the summit, there was Ziba, the steward of Mephibosheth. You remember Mephibosheth is the lame young man who is the grandson of Saul, son of Jonathan, who has been invited to the king's table as an act of kindness that David showed to Jonathan's memory. Okay, so Ziba is the guy that's been taking care of him. He's got a lot of sons. Well, now this guy shows up again. He's waiting to meet him. He had a string of donkeys saddled and loaded with 200 loaves of bread and 100 cakes of raisins and 100 cakes of figs and a skin of wine. So this is obviously premeditated. Ziba showing up with a ton of supplies. The king asked Ziba, "Why have you brought these?" And Ziba answered, "The donkeys are for the king's household to ride on. The bread and the fruit are for the men to eat, and the wine is to refresh those who become exhausted in the desert. Hey, king, I'm just here to help out. I know you're having a bad day. You're in exile. Let me bring you a bunch of stuff to kind of calm things down and make it a little easier for you." Oh, well, then that's great. How does David respond to that? The king then asked, "Where is your master's grandson?" In other words, where is Mephibosheth? Ziba said to him, "He's staying in Jerusalem." Now watch this. "Because he thinks, today the house of Israel will give me back my grandfather's kingdom." Mephibosheth, in the mouth of Ziba, is planning to regain power once Absalom takes the throne, in the sense that his line is going to be reestablished as a royal line. Well, Mephibosheth never said that. Ziba said that. David doesn't check it out. David isn't trying to discern. David might even be thinking that Absalom's going to be successful and that Mephibosheth is right. Well, look at verse 4. The king said to Ziba, "All that belonged to Mephibosheth is now yours." Watch that. If he's betrayed me by kind of going over to Absalom's side, well, then you can take all the land that I gave him, all right? Everything, it's yours. The king decrees it. Ziba, as we'll find out in chapter 19, has really performed an act of deception here, but we have to wait to really unpack that. Ziba says in verse 4, "Hey, king, I humbly bow. May I find favor in your eyes, my lord the king." All right? David just says, look, if he's going to betray me like this, you can have all his stuff. Well, as King David approached Bahurim, A man from the same clan as Saul's family came out from there. His name was what? Shimei, son of Gera. And he cursed as he came out. Listen to this, church. This is so sad. This is King David. Listen, he pelted David and all the king's officials with stones, though all the troops in the special guard were on David's right and left. So he's surrounded by his guys. Nonetheless, this Shimei guy comes up and starts throwing rocks at him. Throwing rocks at the king, and he's cursing the king. As he cursed, Shimei said, "Get out. Get out, you man of blood, you scoundrel." Wow. You know, a lot of times you say something like that to the king, you're going to die right there. King doesn't have to take that. Public disgrace, being shamed in public, throwing rocks at the king, cursing him to his face. Well, Shimei says why he's doing it. The Lord has repaid you for all the blood you shed in the household of Saul, in whose place you have reigned. The Lord has handed the kingdom over to your son Absalom. You have come to ruin because you are a man of blood. So from Shimei's perspective, hey, you're getting payback right here, buddy. You're nobody. God has given the kingdom to Absalom. I'm on Absalom's team, not on your team. You killed a bunch of my relatives when all this power shifted to you, and I hate your guts. that would have to be the Kalevik translation. But nonetheless, he's throwing stuff at him. He's cursing him. Terrible. And he's blaming him. God's doing this to you, David, because you're a man of blood. Well, you can expect a reaction, and there is one in verse 9. Then Abishai, son of Zeruiah, said to the king, "Why should this dead dog curse my lord the king? Let me go over and cut off his head." Well, that would be the typical response to a king that is not going to be dishonored. But what does David do? The king said in verse 10, "What do you and I have in common, you sons of Zeruiah?" Watch this, church. If he is cursing because the Lord said to him, "Curse David," who can ask, "Why do you do this?" In other words, David looks at this situation where this guy's throwing rocks at him and cursing him to his face, and he's saying, maybe God put him up to it. Now, don't you remember, God has stated that he's forgiven David for the sin, right? Chapter 12, Nathan's confrontation. David, your sin's forgiven, but you're never going to have peace in your household again. Well, we've been watching that play out. His daughter's been raped by his son. His son's been killed by his other son. Now Absalom is rebelling and trying to take the kingdom out of his hands. We've seen all that. But psychologically, we see here that David thinks maybe this is all part of God's judgment against him, and that he's not going to retaliate. He's not going to do anything. If the God of gods wants to let this happen, then okay, who is he? David then said to Abishai and all his officials, "My son, who is of my own flesh, is trying to take my life." That's Absalom, right? "How much more then this Benjamite?" That's Shimei. "Leave him alone. Let him curse, for the Lord has told him to." David just acquiesces to this dishonor. "It may be that the Lord will see my distress and repay me with good for the cursing I'm receiving today." So David has been knocked off his high horse and is now in the dust. Somebody's cursing him, throwing rocks and dust at him. His son's rebelling against him. I mean, his life has turned upside down from the favor that he used to experience. And so he says, look, maybe God's going to look at this and he's going to turn this around for my good. I don't know how it's going to happen, but don't stop this guy. Let him do it. So David and his men continued along the road while Shimei was going along the hillside opposite him, cursing as he went, throwing stones at him, showering him with dirt. The king and all the people with him arrived at their destination, exhausted, and there he refreshed himself. So phase 2 in this endeavor in chapter 16, first Ziba has deceived him and he's given all of Mephibosheth's land to Ziba. And now this guy named Shimei is cursing him to his face and he's just letting it happen. Well, watch this. If you think you're having a bad day, here comes another event. Meanwhile, Absalom and all the men of Israel came to Jerusalem. And Ahithophel, we better remember this guy's name. He used to be on David's team, you remember? And Ahithophel was with him. So now Ahithophel, the priest, prophet guy, has defected to Absalom's team. Okay, so there he is. And it says in verse 16, then Hushai, the Archite, David's friend. Remember, David has sent him into this situation as a spy. He went to Absalom and said to him, long live the king, long live the king. So Hushai is trying to win Absalom's favor here. But look at this. Well, let me just show you. Remember in chapter 15, what happens? David prays. He knows Ahithophel has abandoned him. He knows he's gone over to Absalom's team. And what does he say? Now, David had been told Ahithophel is among the conspirators with Absalom, so David prayed. Oh, look, David, even in his weakened, upset condition, knows that he is still in the hands of God. God hasn't forgotten him. David prays, what? O Lord, turn Ahithophel's counsel into foolishness. You know, we've always depended on Ahithophel, and if he's going to go to the wrong side and rebel against me with my son Absalom, God, I just pray that you would put words in his mouth that are not godly words, that they're not direction that you really want. They're foolishness. Wow, watch this. First, Absalom's going to figure out whether this Hushai guy is for real. Is this the love you show your friend? Why didn't you go with your friend? In other words, Absalom's saying, I thought you were on David's team. What are you doing over here? I thought you liked David. Hushai says to Absalom, no, the one chosen by the Lord, by these people, and by all the men of Israel. His I will be, and I will remain with him. So Hushai is trying to disguise his reconnaissance mission by telling Absalom that he's on the team. All right, well, furthermore, who should I serve? Should I not serve the son? Just as I served your father, so I'm going to serve you. Well, that sounds pretty good. And Absalom obviously is willing to receive that. In verse 20, Absalom said to Ahithophel, okay, so here we go. We're going to get some advice that we think is godly. Give us your advice. What should we do? Absalom's thinking about how to consolidate his power and become the next king. Ahithophel answered, lie with your father's concubines, whom he left to take care of the palace. Then all Israel will hear that you have made yourself a stench in your father's nostrils, and the hands of everyone with you will be strengthened. Wow. So, hey, David, you remember what God told you? You did your dirt in private. We're going to make sure that you get humiliated in public for what you've done. That's going to be part of your punishment. Okay, guess what? Here your own son is taking your concubines in public so that the world understands that you are absolutely with no power at all, and that this is a dishonor that's beyond the pale, so to speak. So they pitched a tent for Absalom on the roof, and he lay with his father's concubines in the sight of Israel, of all Israel. So David's shame escalates. Now in those days, the advice Ahithophel gave was like, look at this, like that of one who inquires of God. In other words, he's held in high esteem as one who can tell the truth as God reveals it. That was how both David and Absalom regarded all of Ahithophel's advice. So David's prayed the prayer that Ahithophel will give him bad advice, but both of them, David and Absalom, are still of the opinion that God speaks through Ahithophel. So Ahithophel has given this advice to Absalom to sleep with the concubines, and Absalom has done it. Where does it go from here? Well, you have to come back next time. God bless you, church. Just remember this, though. Sometimes when God's going to refine us, He'll take us all the way through a humiliating sequence to bring us to a place where we know we are nothing, where we are completely dependent on Him, where we surrender all that we thought we could do in ourselves to Him. David's at that stage right now, and we'll watch how God responds as we pursue this book. God bless you, church. Serve Him well today.
Who is it who for sinners shed His blood, and now for cleansing all can plunge beneath that flood? It's Jesus. But do you know who He is? He's the image of the invisible God, and He's the brightness of His glory, the first, the last, the future, the past. He is God.